Welcome to the Business of It All podcast, presented by Fenestration Canada. I'm Cam Drew. Today's topic is tariffs, and our guest is Adrian Edge. He's the Director of Codes and Regulatory Affairs for Fenestration Canada. And Adrian, let's start with the big question about tariffs and how are they going to affect manufacturers selling into the United States?
Sure. That's probably the easiest one, given even with the changes that we saw today and in the initial proposal for decreasing energy, it's not going to impact our industry, but you can expect 25% on anything you are shipping from Canada down. There is some nuance to how you deal with duties as you're moving over the border. A lot of it's going to be very specific to your business, what your supply chain looks like as far as being product over the US into Canada, whether or not you've got businesses on both sides of the border. But we can talk more specifics about that as we go along and as you would like to see to Cam.
Well, we've got manufacturers that are affected. We've also got suppliers, and Fenestration Canada. We're over 350 members now, and that's made up of manufacturers of residential product, commercial products, and also, of course, suppliers who are supplying both the Canadian and the American territories. So, are suppliers affected the same as manufacturers moving product down in the States?
Yeah, again, there is a little bit of nuance there. So, what I mean specifically to that is there is something called substantial transformation of your product that is really important to kind of keep in mind. So, if you're doing work on your product, so let's say, as an example, a manufacturer is bringing in their profile, their glass, and their hardware from the US and you put all those pieces together and now you've got a window and you're going to turn around, you're going to sell that back to a US customer. You have done what is called substantive transformation to those items. If you were to go through the process of breaking down the value of those items in your invoice as it hits the border, you can actually claim that those products or the value of those products were brought in from the US and you wouldn't be tariffed on those, but you would be tariffed on the value added to that product before it came back. So that's where the nuance of this gets kind of weird. I had a really good example of a manufacturer I was talking to, and they're looking at potentially bringing their window frames once they construct them in Canada and coming down to the US with them into a warehouse, and then they'll glaze them down in the US. That process of adding the glass to the frame is actually the rule set for the duties at the border for substantive transformation to a window and door product. So they're able to essentially just show the cost value of that product as it hits the border, and then they won't have to pay tariffs on the entirety of that product. So yeah, anyway, it gives you a little bit of insight.
And I will mention again that this is March 5th. It is 1:08 in the afternoon Pacific time because things change. Earlier today, the auto tariff was postponed by President Trump, and things are very fluid. Counter tariffs were announced today by the Canadian government. Can you give us a rundown on what you know about counter tariffs?
Yeah, so there's two lists of counter tariffs currently. So stage one of the counter tariffs from the Canadian government was made known when the U.S. When Donald Trump wrote his executive order that the tariffs would be put into place. When we had that 30-day pause, we've had the last 30 days to kind of look into that list and understand it. It's really directed towards products that Canadians already make, or as the right phrase is, they are elastic. Our product, we can just easily swap one product for another, or they are a luxury product or something that Canadians don't really need. They're not substantive. And that being said, fruits and vegetables and pieces like that, I think there's some disagreement that is critical to Canadians, but So that first stage list is really supposed to be something that has a fairly small impact on Canadians, but a heavy impact on Republicans and states that support Donald Trump. That was kind of the intent. So the stage two is a bit deeper in the weeds. And for our industry, I'll be honest, when I was reading through it yesterday when it came out, it was a bit disturbing that float glass, tempered glass, laminated glass, PVC, and acrylics are all a part of the stage two list. And for the benefit of this podcast, this was a item that came out of our last board meeting at Fenestration Canada that I will be providing a clear statement to federal and provincial governments specifically about glass that we are adamant that we cannot be counter-tariffed on, that our industry would have a very hard time with that, considering that when it comes to float glass, we don't produce our own. We are absolutely reliant on other countries to have that float glass for our products. So.
So you're sitting, looking at the tariffs, looking at the landscaping, looking at the membership of Fenestration Canada. Who's getting affected the most?
Yeah, so I would say there are two main factors in those members that are going to be the greatest affected. So first is how much of their business is reliant on selling windows down into the US. Do they have a bunch of multifamily contracts? It is if they've got an outsized portion of their business that is reliant on that US dollar coming in, they obviously, that's kind of my first indicator that they are going to have a really hard time with this because they are likely to become non-competitive in the US market because of these tariffs. Second is for those that are importing a fair bit of their goods from the US, so they are reliant on it. And then absolute worst case scenario is the combination of those two. They both import their materials from the US, transform that into the window, and then send that back over the border. They are going to get hit twice. And I would say small to medium sized manufacturers that are selling into the US, they are the absolute worst hit in that whole equation. So I've heard from a couple manufacturers that are in that situation, and it will take substantial changes to their supply chain management in order for them to weather this storm.
Okay. Adrian, anything else that we haven't covered regarding tariffs? And this will be a very fluid conversation. We'll be updating it as changes happen, and as we get closer to all the counter tariffs being enacted. But anything else that manufacturers or suppliers in Canada should know that we haven't discussed?
And I'm not sure how much of this you want to unpack, but I would say for the manufacturer's benefit, right up front, Fenestration Canada is dedicated to supporting you. But like it is, we don't exist without you. And so certainly if we have manufacturers that we are in, if there's any risk of losing our manufacturers or losing our suppliers or them being damaged, it is, I it is very much my role right now to work on what some actionable steps look like to support you all. So with good board support, I have kind of my four pillars of focus when it comes to initiatives. There is safeguarding and improving our fenestration supply chain. So what it means for us to do something like provide that feedback to federal and provincial government that you need to leave glass alone. If you start counter tariffing that, that becomes a major problem. And in call it support of that, we also need to be looking at initiatives to help create float glass manufacturing in Canada. We need to be putting the effort in to ensure that our supply chain is better supported. There is improving our manufacturing capabilities in Canada, that we need to be seeing our manufacturers have the support necessary to expand their footprint and pay their workers better or keep their workers, train their workers, upskill. There's a lot we can do as far as or there's a lot the government could do to help support manufacturers in a difficult time. And we need to be looking at what initiatives we can put forward and suggest that would actually help. Um, the next one is about how would I describe this? Protections around our products. There's no use in trying to expand your manufacturing if you don't feel safe to do so. And one of the problems that, you know, I kind of want to take one small step back. A lot of the problems that I think we're seeing with the tariffs, or we're going to see with the tariffs, were problems we probably already had. So this whole protections for manufacturers is actually a really good one. We've been having a lot of conversations about non-compliant product and products that are being dumped and subsidized. We already knew this was an issue. The problem we have is with a trade war between our closest ally that gets exacerbated. So I'll just use that as a bit of a placeholder for a whole series of other pieces that are kind of the same. So in order for us to overcome it, we do need to be looking at those protections. And there's some initiatives that we're working on in the background that should be able to help with that. And I could explain that further if we wanted. There's also decreasing non-value added costs to our industry. There are standards and regulations and a variety of, call it, put upon requirements that we need to reevaluate a bit. I would say even within my role, one of the things that I was really looking forward to before tariffs and before all of this was happening was taking a good look at our codes and our standards and working with our organization and our members to simplify them. That it's one of the great difficulties I think that I've experienced in the 10 years I've been in the industry is it's really hard to follow our codes, and it is really hard to follow our standards. They are so complicated. And so it is one of my hopes that that initiative, as I mentioned, it becomes a priority as we're kind of looking at trade war and how we support our manufacturers.
Fantastic. I know we'll be talking to you again, Adrian. We'll continue to update this the tariff situation in Canada as it evolves. Appreciate your time today. I will have your contact information on the screen and available for folks to be able to reach out if they have any more questions. So Adrian Edge, Director of Codes and Regulatory Affairs for Fenestration Canada, thank you so much for being our guest today. This has been the Business of It All podcast presented by Fenestration Canada. I'm Cam Drew.